Hello, my name is Jasper Visser. I am from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam, and today I want to talk with you about science museums as catalysts for sustainable development. So this is me here on the left, and this image actually tells the whole story of my presentation, but I'll start with me on the left. So as I said, my name is Jasper Visser, and for the past 10 to 15 years, I've been working on uh, culture, the relation between culture and communities, and the relation between communities and sustainable development. And here in this image slide, I am at an event in the city of Leiden in the Netherlands, talking with hundreds of children about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Not literally, of course, but by asking them questions about the things that they like in their neighborhood and the things that they think can be improved in their neighborhood. Because that's actually one of the main things I like about the Sustainable Development Goals, and likely the thing that is most useful to all of us as cultural organizations. At their heart, the Sustainable Development Goals can only be achieved if we take collective action from the bottom up in our own communities with everyone involved, children, grown-ups, everyone. So the girls on the right who participated in this event, they're actually, I would say in this specific case, the scientists. They're the knowledge keepers, the experts of what is going well and what is not going so well in their own local communities. And in this very instance, we had a conversation about biodiversity, about poverty, about education, and all the things that matter to them in their community. And they actually contributed and provided lots of ideas about what can be improved and the little things and the little parts in their neighborhood that are already going well when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals in these Agenda 2030. Um, Together, the girls and I and hundreds of other children and their parents, we try and stimulate a movement around the Sustainable Development Goals. And we look at the role culture can play in that agenda. And we try and use the cultural infrastructure of Leiden to support these girls and all the others who try and make their community a little bit better in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So what I want to do with you in this little talk is talk from this practical experience I have as the director of this foundation that works in Leiden with children, but also with education, with local businesses and with others to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as my international experience as a consultant helping organizations to do more good and to tell stories that have a positive impact, and bring that together into why I think science museums like you can be a catalyst on this very important sustainable development agenda. So in doing the work that we did, we found very easily that in every single community around the world, there are many things already going well with regards to sustainable development. And there are also lots of challenges. This is a map of Leiden, actually the map we created together with these girls. We have many more maps like these, and we can all overlay them to create a full network of activities that are going well and that can be improved when it comes to all these important goals on the agenda. And time again, when I speak with people about the Sustainable Development Goals, I find that cultural institutions like science centers, but also other museums, pop up as hotspots on these maps. They're mentioned quite often as meeting places, as places where people go to find information, as conveners of groups of people, and as generally speaking, hotspots when it comes to sustainable development. This is not something the science museums or the science centers say, but this is something actually being mentioned over and over by those working on the sustainable development goals. And I've seen this everywhere in the world. I've seen that museums and science museums are seen as trusted partners on this important agenda. And not just because they believe they are, but because they're seen by their communities and seen by their audiences as being important players in this area. So what do I take from this? I see three approaches that science museums can take to fulfill their mission or their sort of like purpose as conveners and as catalysts for sustainable development. And these three approaches, they're slightly different, but each and every museum, each and every science museum should likely take a combination of these. First of all, they can take the lead on a select number of topics. Obviously, science museums are knowledgeable about many different topics, but if you choose one or two or three topics from this agenda, from the 17 goals and 169 targets that make up the Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goals, you can likely have a real impact. In Leiden, where I showed you the map before, we see, for instance, that there's a botanical garden taking on the topic of biodiversity. We see a city museum taking on the topic of livable communities. And every one of the museums in that way takes on a specific role, a specific number of topics that they claim responsibility for and that they take the lead on in finding partners and connecting with these communities in achieving these. The second approach is to support others in achieving their goals. And I think this may actually be a very much overlooked approach for science museums and other museums. So when I talked with the girls I showed at the beginning, we had long conversations about the things that they want to change in their community. And they're still young now, but in maybe 10 years or 15 years, they will have their own NGOs and they will run their own businesses and they'll have their own enterprises and they'll still be working on these goals. And they'll still be looking at museums and science museums for support, for a place to come together, for somewhere to meet, for somewhere to work together. And we've seen this when we organized the global initiative Museums for Future, the museum spin-off of the Fridays for Future climate movement. We've seen that around Museums for Future and museums all over the world, young activists, climate activists came together to use their spaces for educational purposes, for workshops, to create banners and flyers and posters and signs and symbols to wear in the streets and to take to the streets to advocate this agenda of climate change. So the role of science museums to support others and team up with others to help them achieve their goals, their sustainable development goals, is often overlooked. And the third approach, I think, for science museums that science museums can take is the approach all of us should take. And a friend of mine, an artist, called that doing the chores, just making sure you do your homework. Change internally to make your organization and its practice more sustainable. And although this is a very important topic, it's not something that typically applies to science museums because it should apply to all of us in our daily lives. And therefore, it's not something I want to dive into deeply in this talk. So just to give you a couple of examples, right? When I started on this journey and through the work I've done, I've tried to map the agenda, museums on the agenda. And in this image, which is, I recognize, maybe not very clearly visible, but you can find it on multiple places online, as well as in my paper, you can see some of the targets that, generally speaking, I feel museums can lead the way on, topics where they're more suited to support others, and topics that especially demand internal change, internal processes. And science museums, especially, I think, have certain goals that they're more suitable for them than others. And you'll notice that on goal 14 and 15, I haven't highlighted anything. And that's basically because I believe they're generally important for science museums, for natural history museums, and others. So this is not a comprehensive overview, but it gives you maybe some starting points for your action. Some more of a deep dive into these approaches. So when I say that museums should lead the way, or science museums can lead the way, I'm often, museums often come back to me and they say, yeah, but we're not going to be able to achieve a goal or a target at all. We're not going to be able to ensure healthy lives and well-being for people, goal 3. And my response always is organize for impact. So we still have 10 years left to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. and more people start moving. As a science museum, you will not be able to address an issue worldwide and reach its targets, but within your community, by taking a long-term look, a 10-year approach, you may actually be able to achieve the impact that you want in your community. And also not alone, but in collaboration with others. You lead the way, maybe starting this year with a small event, but ultimately working towards a movement in your community and collaboration in community, so that by 2030, on these few topics where you choose to lead the way, you can check the box and be successful. When it comes to supporting others, there's so much to choose from, and there's so many initiatives already going around that allow for museums and science museums to participate. I'm just naming two. So the Frost Science Museum, they're collaborating on cataloging and collecting marine debris and cleaning up the beaches, while many other natural history museums are annually supporting the counting of bees, and they're working together on measuring and tracking biodiversity. And if you go into your own community, there are doubtless many initiatives, both global and local initiatives, that you can partner with. And I'd highly encourage you to start reaching out to these organizations working locally on the Sustainable Development Goals, and connecting with them, talking with them, because we found, both in Leiden and elsewhere in the world, this is the fastest way to have more impact. And then thirdly, even though I don't really think this is something specifically targeted at science museums, but this is something that applies to all of us, people always ask me for a list of the things that you can do in-house, internally, to address this agenda. And I've made a little overview here, and you can see how many of these are fairly easy to implement, whereas others may be harder to implement. But it's also to remind you that the Sustainable Development Goals, they're not just meant for others elsewhere in the world, but they're also meant for us everywhere in every community, and they apply to everyone. And only if we do it collectively can we actually achieve them. So I believe, through my experiences in Leiden and elsewhere in the world, that science museums are maybe especially suited to help others achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to lead the way in selected topics to make this world a greener, fairer, and more sustainable place for all of us. And when people come to me and they ask me, where do I begin? Whether it's the girls I showed at the beginning, or whether it's a CEO of a large museum that reaches out to me to ask, where do I begin? I always tell them, don't worry too much about where to begin. Just begin. Begin by making your institution, its community, and by extension, the world, a better place. Don't stop or don't think too much about the global scale of these goals, but try and make an impact in your local community. It's very easy, it's very simple to put up a table outside like we did in Leiden and start talking with the kids and the others in your community about what they see is going well and not so well. And through that learning, where you can, as a museum, have the greatest impact. I feel science museums as being, by design, very inclusive organizations, very approachable and respectable organizations, are uniquely suited to start this conversation in their communities. And I encourage all of you to do so. I'm very happy to talk more with you about my experiences both in Leiden and internationally, working with museums on the Sustainable Development Agenda, either in the live Q&A that will be organized by the conveners of this fantastic symposium, or on social media or email. I'll share my details with you so you can reach out to me to follow up on any of these topics, but I'll also be there in the live chat and live Q&A. And I really hope we can meet there and continue the conversation there to make science museums catalysts for sustainable development. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you soon.